In the last part, excuse me, I introduced Kahn in more general terms. In the next two episodes, I intend to take up specific ideas, themes, as well as specific buildings and connect them together. Buildings of various sizes and various uses. You have here a small Fisher house near Philadelphia, primarily made of wood, beautifully detailed. Then you have the Salk Institute of Biological Research in California, the Unitarian Church in Rochester, New York, the Management Institute in Ahmedabad, the Kimball Arts Center in Fort Worth, Texas, USA, and the Bangladesh Assembly Parliament House and the whole Capitol complex in Bangladesh. Kahn was also very fastidious about detailing. Apart from building these large buildings, all of these buildings are known for meticulous detailing. The craft of construction was as important to him as the ideas behind these buildings. The 7 primary themes that emerged from looking at his architecture are listed here on the left: order, silence, light, place, construction, institution, and validity. They are, as you can see, not the kind of vocabulary that is used in most of the modern movement in architecture. Let's go one by one and see how it relates to any of this building. In many ways, his architecture is a kind of congruence of those ideas and these buildings. Order. Mostly we understand order as a kind of a harmonious relationship and interdependency between parts of an entity, an organized being. In architecture, quite often we express this through the use of geometry, proportions, scale, etc., relationship between various dimensions, to indicate a kind of a unity, a formal unity amongst various components of the form, of the elements. In classical aesthetic theories, the order is known as constituting a world within a world. Look, for example, the Greek columns. We all have learned it in our history lessons. The Greek orders, they indicate strict relationship between each and every part of the building. You start with a base of the column, it determines how height of the column would be, or in what way various other elements of the building will come together, so that nothing can change without changing the whole. If the diameter of the column changes, the entire building will change. So that it is that kind of a inevitability about the dimension and the order that makes the man-made world a kind of an alternative reality in the midst of this large natural world. Its objective is to represent an alternative reality. Kahn, on the other hand, he looks at an idea, as I said it last time, that it comes from the inner self, and unless there is a sense of inevitability, it will not survive. And it was that inevitability that makes him skirt around all these notions of proportions and dimensional unity, golden sections, etc., etc. This can best be explained by the architecture of an American architect, Frank Furness. These are 2 buildings of Frank Furness in Philadelphia. He was a Philadelphia-based architect. And to introduce Frank Furness in a different way, I will say that We all know Frank Lloyd Wright was mentored by Louis Sullivan, one who wrote or came up with this wonderful dictum, form follows function. Louis Sullivan, on the other hand, was mentored by Frank Furness, who was a 19th century architect. And in that respect, one can say that Frank Furness was the professional grandfather of Frank Lloyd Wright. In any case, these buildings are very unusual. Look at this building. Sometimes they actually look like grotesque work. It's very unusual. Let us look at this, for example, these columns, two columns that support this element of the facade. In the Greek classical method, this column would not be this stunted. They look very stunted. They look like compressed. The same thing happens here in this porch. The columns do not follow the given specifications of proportions that architects were following all throughout the history. Kahn used to look at this and say that maybe Frank Furness wanted to express the fact that they carry so much weight that that weight sort of stunts them down, compresses them. And it is this idea of expressing something that has never been expressed before. That is the beginning of art. That is the beginning of architecture or music or anything for that matter. So it is, if it does so, if it expresses, then it is an order. You can say that, oh, this is in order. That is how Kahn actually meant order to be. The second theme in Kahn's work is silence. Now, this is a philosophical idea and might be difficult to explain, but I'll try to explain it in as simple a language as possible. So let's give it a try. In classical philosophy of aesthetics, the term aesthetics is a category in which beauty is a value of expression. Something is more beautiful than the other. A rose is more beautiful than the other flower, or one woman is more beautiful than the other. There is a value attached to beauty. An object is an instrument of expressing this beauty. The beauty is expressed. We think something is beautiful, and therefore we can say this rose is beautiful. The rose is the form of the flower, is an instrument by which this idea of beauty is expressed. That actually presupposes, assumes that there exists a kind of an awareness, that there exists a link between our human emotions and the objects or the forms of art, which are supposed to embody, carry that sublime and harmonious, beautiful in the universe. It actually also implies, when we talk about awareness, it sort of immediately leads to that we have a knowledge, an a priori, ahead of the time knowledge of what constitutes beauty, sublime and the harmonious. That is a precondition for an aesthetic experience. That we must know ahead of the time what are the qualities that make the rose beautiful before we can actually experience that, and that actually leads us to experience that beauty. Logically, that implies that a knowledge of beauty is a precondition for us to experience beauty. Now, when I say knowledge, I mean something that is categorically known, that we know something is that and something it is not that. So knowledge actually implies an intellectual, conceptual construction of an idea, which is different than having a sense of something. We can say that I sense something I really don't know, but I do have a sense of it. That sense actually is something very different than the knowledge. Here it says that we must first of all have knowledge in order for us to experience beauty. But in day-to-day life, this is incompatible with experience. We actually know something is beautiful only after we see it. You come across a rose and say, this is beautiful. We cannot really have a specification written ahead of the time as to what constitutes the beauty in a rose. It may differ, but we feel that there might be two different kinds of roses. Both may be different in shapes, size, color, but both will be beautiful. That comes only after we experience it. We cannot really say ahead of the time that I know what beautiful is. When I say I have a sense of something beautiful, that means that there is a realization in us that there exists something which is not yet formulated, not yet realized, not yet made, but it has the potentiality of being beautiful because it is an order. So order actually can only be sensed. It cannot be known. Kahn refers to this sense, which is inside the deep crevices of our psyche, our mind, as that he refers to as the silence. For him, the beginning of art, then, before even actually it comes out and it's made, either a painting is drawn or a music is composed or performed or an architecture is built, there is a sense that something needs to be brought out, something needs to be made, something needs to be constructed, which is going to be beautiful. This reminds me of something that a wonderful French thinker, writer, art critic said, André Malraux. He wrote a wonderful book about art and called it The Voices of Silence. Arts, according to André Malraux, are the voices of silence. This is exactly what Kahn meant. Malraux says something very interesting. Though man's feeling for the otherworldly often has recourse to solitude, solitude does not foster its development. Rather, it is nourished by communion, to which the church is more propitious than the cemetery. He's talking about solitude, which Kahn refers to as that volume zero. One has to do a lot of introspection in order to reach that level. And that is that communion that André Malraux is talking about. It can be either in a church or within oneself. This is what Kahn's idea of silence is, that is the beginning of all art. This is where it begins, and this can only be explained. I can demonstrate that with two of his projects as to how that silence can be translated into actual physical reality, the materiality of a building, architecture. This is a project for an auditorium, for actually a performing arts center in America, of which only one building has been built. But these are all the elements of that whole center. 9 different elements: Philharmonic Hall, theater, museum, school, dormitories, art alliances, garages, schools of ballet, and amphitheater. Now, Kahn went through this process of touching his silence, his inner self, and his medium for doing so were the sketches, which you see on the right side, upper right side here. He actually undertook the process of working out through drawings, through sketches, which is his medium. A musician would do through musical notes. Here he is looking at what is it that this project, this center needs or wants to be, what it is inside it that tells him that this is what I want you to give me a form. And in this, there are a series of doodles. Yeah. Each one arbitrarily chosen shapes, but somehow in the process of doing so, through permutation and combination, he is asking each one of these questions, each one of the sketches, is this what I want? Does it have what I have been sensing but not knowing yet? So each one tells him something, and each one says, no, not yet. So that process goes on and on and on. Simultaneously, there are a series of models made, each one again an explorations of not a solution of a problem, but an exploration of what is this center. What does it want to be? What is that which it wants to express? And so a series of each of these sketches or models are actually series of questions that are posed to the project itself. And ultimately through that one arrives at 1, 2, 3 there, and ultimately there where you can see that there is some kind of a serenity about it, some calmness. Others are so restless, you might say. So this serenity comes in by realizing that there is something about this which he referred to as the courtyard of the entrances, where everybody comes and then everybody is related to, all of these elements are related in such a way that nothing can change without changing the whole. So it is this process which demonstrates how a sense in a solitude of one's own self can actually find a presence in this world of nature. This is how it is built. Only one theater is built. It has also gone through various transformations in the process. The second project that I want to demonstrate this idea with is this Unitarian Church in Rochester. This is a church which has a school, a theological school attached to it. His first sketch is that, which puts in the center a question about what this place is, ambulatory around it, and then an outer circle talks about the school. So this is what they call the form diagram, not a design, but a diagram which talks about the relationship between various elements, school and the church and something in between. Then from there on, again like the previous project, a series of sketches follow, which actually in this case takes the diagram of the form literally into a kind of a circular building, ultimately coming up with a plan in which the center, but the question is here, is the church surrounded by an ambulatory passage, and all the elements of the school are surrounded around. However, having made this, Kant realized that this is exactly not what he wanted. This is something that not yet there. It's too literal. That part of the school does not necessarily have to be the same as that part of the school, and neither this and that. There are various elements of the school, various elements of the church, which actually demand to be expressed differently. This is very rigid and literal expression. It's not what he wanted. It's not what the place wanted, and therefore he started the process again. He put both of these side by side with the connector, and immediately rejected that as again too simple. Then he said, okay, out of the school, let's take elements, some classrooms here, something there, something there. Each one has a different demand. Each one has different shapes and size, different quality of light wanted, etc. So let each of this find their own expression. And so what emerged is what he called design. This is the first project at which he, for the first time, distinguished between form and design. Form remains constant, Design emerges out of attending to the circumstantial requirement of human activities. So he writes here, test of the validity of forms and design resulting from circumstantial demands. So ultimately, the church actually has all kinds of things here that satisfy each and every demand, but all of these are different. So this is how the church looks like. The third element of light is equally philosophical, but it's very interesting. He sort of presented his notion of light through these two sketches, which are very cryptic, very difficult to understand. But in this, he writes around this, shows some rays of light, and he writes here, I put it in the simpler terms, eternity is of two brothers. The one desires to express, the other desires to be, to make. The one light non-luminous, the other light luminous. And in the same way, he shows a kind of a flaming dance of light, so to speak. And then he writes around it, it says, the prevailing luminous groups to ignite a wild dance of flaming prevalence, spending to the emergence of material. Poetic. Difficult to understand at first, but let's give it a try. What he's talking about, I think, and I have a good reason to believe I'm right, is that he's talking about light constituting one part of architecture, the other being the materiality of architecture, or materiality of anything that is built actually. And therefore he says that there are two brothers. Eternity is of two brothers. The one desires to express. Light for him is that which is the inner voice or inner sense. We often have this kind of a cartoon pictures where you see a bubble with a light bulb there, saying I have an idea or he had an idea. So the idea is actually that sense of something exists that needs to be explained, that needs to be brought out, it represents light. We call it enlightenment also. So the light is one desires to express. That is the one that desires to come out, that desires to be made. And the other desires to be made. That is the physicality of that which is made. Which is the moment it is made, it is not light, it's called shadows in fact. And the other light luminous. So here he is talking about again the same thing of inner voice, of silence, but he's comparing that now to the light, which in the sense that we use in the word enlightenment. And then the second one says, the prevailing luminous groups to ignite a wild dance of flaming prevalence. That means that he's talking about how that light and the material of architecture are one and the same. One becomes the other over a period of time when conditions are right. We all are aware of this famous equation by Einstein, E equals mc square. I believe these two men, more or less contemporaneous, were thinking the same thing. Einstein's E represents energy, which we often understand as light. M is the matter, materiality. He says that when matter travels at the speed of light, it becomes energy. I think Kahn is speaking the same thing but in a different way. Einstein chose a mathematical formula, a rational. Kahn chose a very poetic way of putting it, but both of them are saying that energy and matter, light and prevalence, light and the materiality of that which is built are one and the same. One becomes the other given certain conditions. So that is light. Remaining four elements, four themes of Kahn's thoughts, we will take up in the next episode. Thank you.